what's up, guys? Welcome to Earwax. I'm Colin, and today we're going to be going over my top 5 most influential albums from my youth. Now, this list is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be your traditional top 5 where there's like a ranking or as far as like how much I enjoy them. These are really just the 5 albums that I think had the biggest impact on my musical taste that I listened to when I was growing up. Each of these albums helped me define exactly what I liked at that time. They all came out between, I want to say, or at least I got them all between the ages of like 10 and 13. So pretty heavily influenced like my definitive years of developing a music taste. And each one of them is very special to me and holds a very near and dear place in my heart. So let's get started. Coming in at number 5 is going to be The Wall by Pink Floyd. Now, I got this for my 10th birthday, and I do believe it was the first CD that someone ever bought for me. At least one of the first CDs that I actually like physically owned. My dad got it for me. You know, he was definitely the most important influence in my life when it came to classic rock and a lot of like 80s rock and 70s rock. And it is, in my opinion, one of the best prog rock / concept albums ever written. While I don't necessarily think that it's just like my favorite Pink Floyd album, I do think it's one of the most important in their discography. It was really the last album where all the core four members were still getting along. Obviously, Roger Waters left shortly after they released this album. You know, they did come out with the final cut, but that's more of like B-sides from this album, and it was really kind of the last-ditch attempt for Roger and David to work together still. But that being said, obviously they went out on a high point. I do think that this is being the last of their core 4 albums that gained like, you know, major popularity and off-the-chart sales records and listens. I think it's probably my least favorite of those 4, but it's still so important to me. It helped define my love for prog rock, classic rock, psych rock, concept albums in general. And without it, I definitely would not be listening to a lot of the stuff I do now. And it's still an all-time favorite. I still play it pretty heavily. And that's why it's definitely one of the most important albums of my childhood. Similarly, on my 10th birthday, one of my friends got me Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park. Now, Linkin Park was, I want to say, probably the first really like new metal band I ever listened to. Definitely the first modern metal band I'd listened to. Up until that point, I had heard like some Metallica and some other stuff here and there, but nothing that sounded like this. It was also probably my first experience to like rap and hip hop. You know, being a white kid from the suburbs of San Diego at this time, there wasn't a ton of that going around. But the minute I listened to this thing, I was hooked. I still think this and Meteora are Linkin Park's 2 best albums. I was very grateful to be able to see them before Chester passed. And without this album, I probably would not listen to a lot of the like more alt metal or new metal or even like hip hop that I do nowadays. Because not too long after this album came out, I got the remix album, Reanimation. It was also probably like one of my first introductions to like underground hip hop and remix hip hop and just mashups and you know, that whole concept of taking a song and kind of reconfiguring it. So the first time I ever heard it was off this as well. So yeah, very, very different albums for my 10th birthday, but 2 of the most important for sure. All right, next is going to be Burning Bridges by Haste the Day. Now, I first discovered Haste the Day in 2004 at a Christian music festival called Spirit West Coast. My dad had taken us in Del Mar Fairgrounds in San Diego, and I wanted to go see a motorbike show. And tethered to either side of the motorbike show were 2 Christian metalcore bands that I had never heard of before, didn't know what metalcore was, didn't know what screamo was. First band was Norma Jean. They actually absolutely crushed it. And then following that was Haste the Day. Or maybe it was Haste the Day first and then Norma Jean. Honestly, I can't remember. It's been almost 20 years. But the fact remains, it was my first time hearing music like this. And my little 12-year-old brain was hooked. This was the first, I think, album I ever really gravitated to that was something completely outside of the realm of what my friends or my parents were listening to. No one else was digging this stuff like I was back then. I mean, obviously, a lot of people were, but no one in my immediate circle was. And I kept coming back to this album over and over and over again. Without it, I would not have the same love that I do for not just metalcore and screamo, but every other genre that's related to that I've fallen in love with over the years, including hardcore, deathcore, even some of like the just straight death metal stuff that I listen to. It all stems really from me playing this album on repeat for years when I first discovered them at 12. And definitely one that I'm stoked to finally have gotten on vinyl. I know the original pressings were super expensive, and they did like a one-off repress a few years ago. And this is the most recent repress. So I'm glad I was able to get it added to my collection. All right, also in 2004 was the album Chuck by Sum 41. Now, this is arguably one of my favorite albums of all time. Sum 41 was always my like go-to pop punk band. They were who I really fell in love with as a kid growing up in San Diego. I know so many SoCal pop punk bands, and I hitched my wagon to a Canadian one, but I think this album right here is just like their absolute peak. It's when they really started leaning into more of the heavier stuff. They started incorporating a lot more thrash metal elements. I was a little disappointed when they went back to just the straight pop punk on Underclass Hero, which may be why it's taken me so long to really appreciate that album as much as I do now. But that being said, this album right here, I remember, I had been listening to Sum 41 for a couple years. I had wanted to go out and get Does This Look Infected, but my parents wouldn't let me have it because it had a parental advisory label on it, and this one did not. So even though I snuck listens of Does This Look Infected from my friends and stuff here and there, this was the first album of theirs I was able to go out and buy and have a physical copy, and I just played on repeat over and over and over again. There are no bad songs on this album. I think it's absolutely incredible. It is the first real taste of what kind of come to define Sum 41 and separate them from other bands in their genre, where they leaned a little bit more into the heavier thrash metal, alt metal influences, while still maintaining like very traditional pop punk choruses and song structures overall. So yeah, I think this is hands down one of the most underrated albums that I will talk about. Not enough people give it a listen. If you're a fan of Sum 41, you know it's their best album. And without it, I would not listen to nearly as much like pop punk or punk as I do now. And without it, I would definitely not be as into thrash metal as I am now. All right, and last but certainly not least, we've got Demon Days by Gorillaz. Now, this is no surprise to anybody that knows me. I am probably one of the biggest Gorillaz fans you'll ever meet. I cannot talk enough about Damon Albarn and Jamie Hewlett and the incredible creation that they were able to come to on not just this album, but like the entire project overall. This album came out in 2005. So when I first discovered Gorillaz, it was back on that same 10th birthday, which I'm now realizing a lot of my musical taste stems from. One of my buddies burned me a CD and it had Clint Eastwood on it, and I was just absolutely stoked and hooked on that song. So in 2004, when they first started teasing this album, it was like right when YouTube was getting big, or at least like, I had discovered it, at least in my life. The videos for Feel Good Inc. and El Mañana had been out, and I just watched those over and over and over and over again. Eventually, when the album was released in 2005, went out, bought it, and again, I had this thing on repeat in my Walkman for months and months and months. And not only is this one of the most important, influential album of the aughts, but of the new millennia as well. I really can't say anything about it that hasn't been said over and over and over again. If you haven't listened to this album, what are you doing? Go listen to it. It is absolutely incredible. Outside of that, I'll just say this is what really developed my interest in not just like indie electronica and alternative and hip hop, but like a combination of all those things. The first time I ever heard MF Doom, even though I wouldn't really go figure out who he was until a few years later. It's my first time ever hearing Booty Brown, and again, Farside group I wouldn't get into until a few years later. But two hugely influential tracks with November Has Come and Dirty Harry. Dare was the first like indie dance, groovy, just like electronic song that I'd ever listened to that wasn't like Blue by Eiffel 65 or Daft Punk. So I really can't talk enough about this album and how important it is to me. Again, I don't think there's anything that I can say about it that has not already been said, so I'll spare you. But at the end of the day, it is not just one of my favorite albums of all time, but easily one of the most influential albums of my current music taste. Well, cool. Yeah, guys. So that's, the 5 albums that really help define my musical taste nowadays. There's so much more that I've now branched out from those 5 albums, but a lot of the stuff that I still listen to very heavily is because of those. I definitely think that those, formative years of 10 to 13 is really kind of what solidified my love of diverse music and my love of just discovering new music, and it's something that's stuck with me ever since. So yeah, anyway, let me know what your guys' 5 most influential albums from your childhood were down in the comments. If you listen to these albums, let me know what you think. If you haven't, go check them out. And as always, I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.